Hey, so I don't usually do video content. I usually do written up long form content for machining projects and whatnot. But I want to do something a little different because I have noticed there's not much video content about these larger Kohler generator sets. And I've got one here I've been working on. And the last major issue with it is a leak in the radiator. And figured I'd capture some video of getting the radiator out as I evaluate whether it's worth repairing or replacing and what the next steps will be. So far, all I've done is took off the front grill. It's just a handful of like 1/4 bolts that go into riv nuts in the front of the housing there. See, I've got that off and leaning against the table here. And I think the next steps, instead of taking the whole front of the housing off, I'm going to try and take that middle section out. There's bolts and either riv nuts or nuts on the inside that I'll take out and hopefully get that middle 80% out of there. So I'll take a shot at that and see what comes up next. So here are the fasteners we're going to be taking off to separate that panel. Got these along the inside that hold these two folded edges together. And probably should mention a little bit more about this machine. This is a Detroit Diesel branded. The model number on it is 50 DSEJB. But this is appears to be a Kohler generator set that's effectively just rebranded to be Detroit Diesel. Based on some of the part numbers I found, it looks like all the parts are supplied through the Kohler dealer and parts network. So I picked this up for a pretty cheap price because it was not running. It hadn't been run in 5 or 6 years. And my hope was to get it working and then either rewire it from 3-phase 208 to split phase 120 240 and use it here for the house and the shop as a standby generator. But that has a whole lot of extra work involved in getting 2 transfer switches set up and then all the trenching and conduit involved. So I may just end up getting this working and then getting it on a couple different marketplaces and see what kind of price I can get for it. But so far I've worked on some controls issues, there's some mouse damage to mainly the switches on the main panel for the low voltage inputs to choose between run, standby, auto, these switches here. So I replaced all 3 of those. I found drop-in replacements for them after working backwards on the sizing and part numbers and whatnot that I could find on them. And it's got a handful of small issues, but the big one I found is it runs for 30 seconds and cuts off because the coolant level is low. And after trying to add some water to it, I did find that there's a leak about 2/3 to 80% of the way up the generator or the radiator. So I'm gonna try and pull that out, inspect it, and then figure out next steps from there. So these fasteners that I'm trying to get to now are really tight. I don't know if they're rusted in place. They're much tighter than the other ones I was getting to. Unfortunately, the heads are really close up against the front of the housing. They are riv nuts on the back, so I shouldn't have to worry about holding nuts unless one of them spins loose. But I'm going to work on getting those loose, figure out what I can do to get a good grip on them. That little ratchet doesn't give me enough torque. And this air ratchet gets in there, but it doesn't have enough beans to break them loose. So I'm going to figure out what I can get on there without breaking something. All right, new plan. These fasteners, if I get them to turn, they end up just spinning the riv nut loose out of the piece in the back. So I'm not sure that was going to give us the access that would really help me anyway. I think the new plan is going to be to take off these enclosure pieces around the accessory belt drive, the generator or alternator and whatnot. If I can get these housing pieces off, get this cage behind the fan out, and then that might give me enough room to get to the 4 bolts that hold the fan. I don't know if it's just direct drive or if there's a clutch in there, but whatever that is, if I can get those 4 pieces off the fan, take the fan out, get the shroud out, and then maybe access the generator, the radiator from the back here. So I'll work on getting the tins off and some of the other covers and whatnot. If I can get those off and that looks promising, then at some point I'll drain the radiator and we'll get deeper into it. But first I'm going to see if all these tins come off and if they are the better way to get into this. Because this is rebranded Kohler and I don't know what the equivalent Kohler model number would be, to what degree I've had success digging into that, I don't have a lead on a service manual or other information for this. And as I mentioned originally, this is just, there's no information online about servicing these. I think everybody who has one of these is under a service contract, or they are doing the service themselves as part of a dealer network. There's not much information out there for doing this yourself outside of one of those networks. So we're just kind of making this up as we go, and we'll see where we end up. All right, a few wasp nests later, and I got a bunch of the covering off of there. Took it off in a few pieces. Probably could have come off in one assembly, but I got a couple pieces off and then did the rest as one assembly. Next is this wire guard on the back of the fan. I got 3 of the 4 bolts out. I'm gonna have to grab a 13 millimeter box wrench or something for that one, just so I don't have to take this coolant elbow off because it's kind of in the way. So it looks like the housing and the frame of this machine are SAE sizes, inch size, and then all the engine, all the John Deere stuff is probably metric. That seems to be what it is so far. These are all 8 and 10 millimeter heads on these M6 and M8 fasteners around the guards here. And then it seems to be inch size as we get to the housing and the frame of the unit. So next up, I'll take the wire guard off. It is slotted, so it can lift straight up off the back, or up all over. Let me see if I can get that to focus. Yeah, you can see it's slotted, so it'll lift straight off over the back of the fan. And then hopefully we can unbolt the fan and then take the cowl, the air housing off the back of the radiator. And at that point, drain the coolant, take the upper and lower coolant hoses off. And then it's a matter of figuring out how to get, at that point, the fan and cowl should be out, and it'll be a matter of unbolting the frame. I don't know, maybe just take the radiator out of the frame instead of taking this whole black metal frame out. So that's what's next. Well, I hit a bit of a snag. I got that last piece of the housing for the accessory belt and the back of the fan drive here off, and that bolted up against these 4 bolts here, tying into the wire guard as well as this lower guard for the belt. The problem is that in the back there's a bolt with a weld nut that attaches that lower guard to this wire housing, and with that there, the wire housing can't be lifted off. So I need to think for a minute. We might be back to trying to take this out the front, because getting the space behind the fan, behind the radiator, is now looking less convenient. So I'm going to think on this for a few minutes, and then we'll see where to go from here. All right, well, I'm back to plan A. Getting these fasteners out of the 2 pieces of the housing. It turns out they're not riv nuts, they are nylock nuts on the what I call the front side, or the outside versus the inside. The hard part is, without a helper holding those, trying to get tools on both sides to break them loose. Once they start spinning, even, you still got to maybe break the nylock nut loose fully. So I'm doing this, sneaking this ratchet on the other side, flexing the head so I can hold it at an angle against the back, and then using a ratchet on this side as well to undo it, and then carefully threading it out and getting the nut out of the socket. That's working for the 3 so far. I'm a little worried about that top one in the corner, but if I can get everything on this side, the other side should be the same. All right, I got the front of the housing off. It was 4 bolts on each side. It was a little trickier on this side. The gap was smaller, so I actually couldn't even feed my flex head wrench, flex head ratchet through. I had to feed the handle through from this side, and then bring it from over there, flex it, and get it on like this, and then undo it with the ratchet and air ratchet on the other side. Then capture the nut, flex it through, rotate this, and then I'd use the bolt to retrieve the nut from the socket, and then move this up to the next one. Definitely a helper would be handy. But next, I think, is I'm going to take these fasteners off the, what I call the inner grill, inner cover, and see what it looks like, whether the radiator is mounted inside this black frame and can be removed, or whether this whole black frame has to come out for repair or replacement. Hopefully the radiator can be unbolted and slid out the front. We'll see. All right, so I got that inner grill off. It was what, 5 or 10 or 12 of these like 1/4-inch self tappers holding that on. So I got those pieces off, and unfortunately, it looks like the whole frame is going to have, if I want to take the radiator out of the front, the whole frame's going to have to come with it, because the front of the frame is bent over to attach that front cover to, the radiator itself can't come out the front. So it looks like I'm going to have 6, like, I don't know, 1/2 inch or 3/8 bolts or something down at the bottom, 3 on each side. And I think that's it. And then the whole radiator might be able to tip out the front. So I'll loosen those, see if that's what it looks like. If so, I'll take the lower radiator hose off and drain this out, and we'll see what comes after that. All right, the radiator is free. We were Batrick fasteners holding the frame of the radiator to the frame of the enclosure. So it was 3 17mm heads on each side. It is loose and just standing there now. And so I'm slowly draining the remaining coolant out of this. I think I see where the leak is in the front. Sorry to keep moving around. I think the leak, you can see wetness up to about here or so, maybe about a little less than halfway up the radiator. And that makes sense, because when I took the upper radiator hose off, it was completely empty. You can see I turned the radiator hose to get access to some, probably was a fastener or something earlier. And or when I thought I was going to lift that wire guard straight up off the back, I needed to get the hose out of the way back when I was doing plan B. So draining now, and then we'll see how heavy this thing is to get it out the front of the enclosure. All right, well, we got answers. It wasn't too heavy. I was able to maneuver this out by myself and lift it down to the ground. So I was looking at what damage we have inside, and I mean, it's impact damage from the fan side of the radiator core. And I was thinking, like, what could have done this? And I'm thinking back, and I did have a memory that this had a good coolant level when I first brought it home. And so I was thinking, okay, that timeline, that type of damage, and what would have caused the leak while I was here. On the first test runs, I think this thing was eating all these nuts and spinning up a bunch of trash that was behind the radiator. Lesson learned, I should have checked what kind of debris might have been inside here. I checked the intake, I checked the air, the air induction system, but I did not think to check inside the radiator housing. I checked the coolant level, but I didn't check this. So this is probably an expensive mistake. This is not, this isn't totally trashed if that's the only leak. It looks like maybe there's one more leak down here too. There's a wet spot. Could it be repaired? I don't know. But there's so much damage around the circumference where this debris got mashed in. This is pushed in maybe 1/4 of an inch. Like it certainly would cool. The question is, how close is more of this damage to generating more leaks? So I have pricing on a new radiator from Kohler for this. It was a $750, not including freight and taxes. Let's say it's $1,000. That's an expensive mistake. A lesson learned there on what else to check after something comes out of storage and I get it running like this. This damage could have happened in that first 30 seconds after I fixed the switches that kept it from running when I first got it to the shop. So that's probably all for now. I'm going to work on tracking down parts, and if there's a local radiator shop that wants to take a look at this, I can get their opinion, see if I can get a decent repair from a reputable shop for cheaper. I'm not familiar with what shops around here might be able to do this kind of repair. But that's the answer. Captured most of the coolant as I took it down and it tilted. I threw a masonry mixing tray underneath. So this is how it's going to be for a couple weeks while I figure out what to do for repair or parts. That's all for now.